Moreover, conflict, war, intervention are almost always more costly than expected. Who initiates a war thinking one is going to lose? One of the great quotes before the Civil War, the American Civil War, was Senator Chestnut, a former South Carolina senator. His comment was, "I will drink all of the blood that will be spilled as a result of secession." 600,000 dead Americans later, there was an awful lot of blood to be drunk. And what one finds is the ultimate hubris is the notion that people in Washington can predict, let alone control events, can know where wars are going. Remember when we were supposed to have beaten different insurgencies, created new nations. We are in Afghanistan 8 years out, 8 years, longer than World War II, twice as long as World War I, twice as long as the Civil War. And we do not see an effective Afghan state. We do not see the disappearance of an insurgency. To the contrary, it is stronger. And as Bruce pointed out, we cannot even express what victory means. 8 years out. These events are uncontrollable. But practicality is not the only thing. All of these are very good reasons to oppose war, but they're also very important to look at morality as well. The problem here is that in Washington, nobody wants to talk about moral issues. There's an assumption that America is wonderful and good, and in many ways our country is wonderful and good. But that doesn't mean that we are beyond the temptations of power. It doesn't mean that Lord Acton's aphorism that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely does not apply to us. That we have to be willing to judge our own actions as well of those around us. It's very important then to look at the morality of action as well. Peace is the moral policy. Peace, not war. Peace. Now, we admittedly live in an imperfect world which doesn't conform to the wishes that we might have. But peace is the condition that allows freedom to flourish. Peace is the condition that allows us to live our lives. Peace is the condition with which we can have a constitutional republic. We can make a living. We can communicate with family. We can live in the way that what makes life worthwhile. Now, this shouldn't have to be explained. But of course, in Washington, it does. And service in the military is an honorable thing. My father was a career Air Force. My former brother-in-law was career Air Force. My nephew is now, God bless him, becoming a SEAL. These are people who do wonderful, extraordinary things. But what they do are wonderful, extraordinary things. They should be doing it on behalf of a peaceful society. Military service can bring out honorable and sublime virtues, but war is the worst, most horrid human activity, creating death and destruction at a mass level. It is peace is the objective. Protecting peace is the objective. Now, people like Teddy Roosevelt found peace boring, but that kind of boringness is what makes our society worth living. It's what makes our families worth enjoying. It makes our hobbies and our friendships and everything else that we engage in the center of our lives. It is the life, and as Bruce said, the individual, the life outside of the state. It's our life as individuals and in community with one another, which is why we have a military to start with, is to protect that life in community with one another in a peaceful and free society. The military's duty, its objective, is to protect that society. So to break that, to break the notion of peace, to go to war, must require overwhelming justification. War is not just another option, another choice to be made, another policy alternative. Where, for example, in housing policy, you can have Section 8 housing or public housing or vouchers, and you choose one of them and it doesn't matter. War is not such a thing. War is something of its own, very different. War is essentially an immoral act that is viewed in some circumstances as necessary, as opposed to a desirable alternative to be chosen in conjunction with others. So the question then is, when is war just? When is war right? Now, the justice of war, the question of when war is appropriate, is one that philosophers and politicians and policymakers have been struggling with for centuries. There's a whole tradition called the just war tradition, which grows out of St. Augustine, Grotius, Locke, and others. And it's a useful way of looking at and thinking about the decision to go to war. There are problems with it. It's long been used by everyone who goes to war to justify going to war. Everyone takes the just war tradition and tries to fit their war within it. Nevertheless, the requirements that it sets out give us a starting point for evaluating the problems of war. And again, there is no exception for America. We cannot start and assume that any war that we begin is just. We have to make the same kind of critical assessments of our wars as we make of other nations' wars. It's absolutely essential then to ask the question whether it's an American war, a Republican war, a conservative war, whoever's war. Now the traditional test, the first is legal authority, that a war has to be started by proper legal authority. Well, in the US, that would seem to mean following constitutional processes. It would seem to mean a congressional declaration of war. It would seem to me a Congress taking and accepting its constitutional responsibility and not delegating it and throwing it off on the president as it does today, because Congress would much prefer to have the hard decisions made by somebody else as opposed to being held accountable themselves. Just war tradition also says that war should be reserved to redress wrongs that are suffered. Now that means a specific wrong. That doesn't mean some generic desire to save humanity or reorder the globe or to make the world a better place. It means a specific wrong to you or to those to whom you have a genuine duty to protect, not to mankind in general or the international community, whatever that is. That's a phrase, of course, I never understand what it is, especially when the likes of Madeleine Albright and Hillary Clinton are the ones who are actually using that phrase. The just war tradition also tells us that war should be a last resort. That means you have to do other things first. The starting point is not to say, wouldn't it be wonderful to unleash our jets, but it's to use every other step necessary, including, most importantly, defending America. Most of the threats around the globe are not ones that we have to go abroad and destroy. We merely have to defend ourselves. There are lots of evil characters around the world. We could start with Kim Jong-il in North Korea. This is a truly monstrous regime. It's starved hundreds of thousands of its own people. But the one thing I tell people about Kim Jong-il is, the man is evil, but he's not stupid. He wants his virgins in today's life, not the next. And he understands that if he tried to attack the United States, that North Korea would cease to exist. We don't have to go to war with North Korea, because North Korea has no intention of going to war with us. So war is only a last resort, not a first resort. We are also told by the just war tradition that war needs to have a reasonable chance of success. Now that suggests having achievable and known objectives. For example, what is victory in Afghanistan? How can you have a reasonable chance of success if the President of the United States cannot tell you what your friends, your brothers, your fathers, and others are fighting for? What are they trying to achieve? I just came back from Afghanistan on Wednesday, because my view was, another person at CATO, that we're writing about these issues. We'd like to see what's going on there. And it's very hard to see what we are achieving. After 8 years, Kabul is a fortified city. Every US embassy, every military installation, every bank, every hotel, every organization's office is a fortress. Every street has armed cops. Intersections have armored Humvees. Barbed wire is sold by the mile. This is our success after 8 years. Talk to Afghans about the Afghan government, which we are currently celebrating because the president of Hamid Karzai came to Washington this week, and the president of the United States said what a wonderful man he was, and all was forgiven. It's very hard to find anybody in Afghanistan who says all is forgiven. This is not a functioning government. It is not capable of functioning. What, in fact, are we trying to achieve? Is there any reasonable chance of success in this country? How I wish, but I think not.